Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Julianne Senyard and I'm here to actually walk you through an entrepreneurial leadership exercise called the Quilt and Jigsaw exercise. It was first developed by Heidi Neck from Babson College back in 2010, and it actually is really interesting because it studies the difference between effectual and prediction logics, which is based on effectuation theory that was first created by Saraswati. What we actually want to do in terms of learning objectives is to experience the difference between managerial thinking and entrepreneurial thinking, engage with conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity, and illustrate how entrepreneurs think. This exercise consists of students starting in one room with the task of completing a jigsaw puzzle. Students are systematically moved from that first room to a second room where they're asked to create a quilt based on a selection of fabric pieces. The debrief explores the differences between the quilt making versus the jigsaw making exercise and links it to different types of ways of understanding how individuals think, but they also have at the end the debrief, we have an optional debrief around entrepreneurial leadership. The 21st century skills being taught in this exercise include creativity, innovation, my favorite, leadership, problem solving, negotiation, confidence building, communication, pitching, networking, teamwork, and design and prototyping through the quilt exercise. We recommend that this works for all audiences, and it's really good at the start of a course where you're trying to get them to think around the ways they understand the world or the ways that they problem solve, because both the quilt and the jigsaw puzzle kind of looks at linear versus non-linear ways of understanding an exercise. And it's also a great way to discuss entrepreneurial leadership. So, what are the resources we need? A 300-piece jigsaws, a timer, 2 rooms, and some quilt fabric. Typically, you can get the quilt fabric from Spotlight, and the more diverse, the better. We're going to be organizing students into teams of 6, so you need to make sure that you have enough jigsaw puzzles for groups of 6, for the amount of groups that you have. So, as I said before, you need enough tables to host 6 in a group, but this one is the jigsaw room, and in that jigsaw room is the jigsaw puzzles on each desk, typically not created, just all in the box. And to set up the fabric room or the quilt room, you need to have a clear floor where possible, have a desk or 2 for students with disabilities, if relevant, and have a large table where the fabric you can pile all of the fabric on. So, they walk in and they see a large pile of fabric. So to start the exercise, the first thing you do is you get them into groups of 6 and indicate that there will be a time limit of 25 minutes. And this is what you suggest to them. Hello team, your task is quite easy, but you don't have a lot of time. Your goal is to put together the puzzle that is sitting on the table as fast as you possibly can. You can do it. Yes, you can. Hurry up, get started, you're being timed. So there's this notion of time compression and really needing to get a job done quickly, which is kind of linking to these ideas of environments where there's time pressure, uncertainty, and ambiguity. 5 to 10 minutes later, you interrupt them and you ask for a volunteer from each group and you walk them to the quilt room. And there you say, congratulations, you're now a lead quilt maker. Your task is quite easy, but you don't have a lot of time. Pick one of the designated areas in the room, and your goal is to construct a design for a quilt. Choose 6 pieces of fabric to start with, no more, no less. You may not exchange fabric once you choose. Others will be along soon. Your task is to convince them to join your quilt making experience. No sewing is required. Simply start by organizing your fabric on the ground as if you were to sew the pieces together and create the quilt. Have fun. So what happens next? Every 2 to 3 minutes, the instructor or the facilitator goes in to the Jigsaw room and asks for volunteers or selects individuals and then continues to bring them into the quilt room. And as they're bringing them into the quilt room, they say, "Congratulations, it's time to join a quilt making team. Your new task is quite easy, but you don't have a lot of time. Join one of the groups in the room. You do not have to stay with the team members from your puzzle group. So your goal is to construct a design for a quilt, choose 6 pieces of fabric, no more, no less, and join a group or start your own to construct the quilt. You may not exchange the fabric once you've selected it. No sewing is required. Simply place your fabric on the ground if you were to sew it and have fun." So the original people who were selected as volunteers are trying very hard. They're pitching their ideas, or they're trying to get people to come into their group. And these new volunteers are coming in and having to listen to pitches, but also they can choose to become their own quilt experience as well. So every 2 to 3 minutes, you're going and picking up more volunteers from the Jigsaw room. And yes, so I just explained that. They pick whichever group that they want to go into. And eventually, they'd start developing this end product. And the more people that join, some quilts grow larger and become more creative. When you get to the last people that are still in the Jigsaw room, when they come into the quilt room, give them at least 2 minutes to sort of connect with the group and have a quilt making experience with a team, okay? But typically, what they don't realize yet is that they've gone through 2 different processes of thinking. So they're working on this separate task, and we finish that all up and we provide a debrief. So the debrief may happen within the quilt room or back in the Jigsaw room, depending on the group size. If debriefing in the quilt room, have each quilt leader describe how the design of the quilt emerged. If debriefing outside the quilt room, give students time to walk through each quilt design, to study all of them before leaving the room. Begin with these questions. So how many preferred the puzzle experience and why? How many preferred the quilt experience and why? And then thinking about your quilt experience, ask the leaders about how their design came to be. Ask team members why they joined one team over another. And how did it feel moving from a puzzle to a quilt task? What type of thinking was required for each part of the exercise? So, in summary, the jigsaw puzzle is akin to managerial thinking. So traditionally in managerial theory, there was this guy called Fail, right? So Fail, what he said was, managers need to plan, lead, organize, and control, and it's all very linear. And similarly, in the jigsaw puzzle task, we see a lot of linear processes, right? We see goals, get resources, set aside time to plan, get organized, execute the plan, and measure progress. Do we actually get to achieve the goal or not? So that's very like managerial thinking. And the quilt exercise is more like entrepreneurial thinking, right? So entrepreneurs start with what they have rather than the resources they think they may need, just like the students started with fabric. When entrepreneurs are not sure what they do, their only choice is to keep moving and act. So pick a group and get to work. The design of the quilt emerges over time because it's difficult to plan. Because you don't know which pieces of fabric are coming into the design, you often have to modify the design as more people come in, just like entrepreneurs often have to change plans as a result of better understanding their customers or better understanding their environment or realizing there's a problem with the design or the product or the service that they're creating. You never really know when it's quite finished. So in the quilt, same. you can see a pattern emerge and then it shifts and then it morphs. And it's only as a result of the timing that they may actually stop and go, okay, I think that's enough. And creating something new often requires iteration rather than linear planning. Here is an optional leadership debrief, which is around 20 minutes. So we asked the students to write down their own definitions of leaders and how did you see leadership around you in that exercise? So call on several different quilt groups and say, who was your leader and how did they lead? And who was the assigned leader, or how did these assigned leaders emerge? Ask an assigned leader to describe their experience. How and when do you decide to lead or to follow? So there's, for those individuals that said, I'm not really interested in any of those designs, I want to do my own, what made them decide to lead versus follow? And what's the difference between leadership, management, and entrepreneurship? And what is entrepreneurial leadership? Key takeaways. When faced with uncertainty, the only choice is action. You need to keep moving. One type of thinking is not better than another, so managerial thinking is not better than entrepreneurial thinking. It all depends on context. And just to reiterate, action trumps most things. You need to keep moving, so action trumps planning. I hope you really enjoy this exercise. I'm keen to hear any feedback you may have around it, but thank you so much for listening to this presentation.